Hi, this is Mala Ramakrishnan. I'm the founder and managing partner of Progressive Ventures, and with me I have Dave McJannet. I'm super thrilled to have you, Dave, because I've been following you for a number of years since we first met, I think in 2012,
Yeah.
around that time frame.
Thanks for having me. Our paths have crossed over a bunch of times.
Bunch of times. And it's really interesting to see all the things you've done, and would love to hear about your journey starting from being a chartered accountant from Canada. How did you make the transition into tech, and why, and what's it been like for you?
Yeah, we were just talking about how I actually started my career as a chartered accountant in Canada, but I was always gravitating towards tech. And when I eventually moved to the U.S. in around 2000 for the first time, obviously there was a lot of sort of furor in the market, and that gave me an opportunity to do a kind of a hard pivot into something else. And I think the lesson was, because I was willing to kind of restart and do something from ground zero, people were willing to take a chance on me. And so I actually ended up flipping into doing middleware product development, which feels like a long way from chartered accountant. But, in an entry level job, doesn't really matter all that much. I think the truth is, we get a bit too fixated on what we learn in school, and most of what you learn in school is not relevant a few years into your career. So if you take that mindset, it's not that difficult to switch and start again.
Yeah, it's more the discipline that you of learning that I guess you acquire as a student.
Correct. Yeah, it's sort of
Yeah.
the particularly technical skills, even computer science in a way. What you may have learned 20 years ago is not the relevant computer science of today.
Absolutely.
The principles are the same, but conceptually they're very, very, very different. So I think what we get out of formal education is less the technical skills and more the frameworks for learning.
Framework and the network, I guess.
In a sense,
Yeah.
can be the network. Yeah, sometimes it's a brand that gives you an entry point into an organization. But as long as you approach your career with the view that intellectual curiosity is the superpower, and you can put it to whatever direction you select, I think you can get pretty much anywhere.
I love that, especially because I get into a quandary when I come across founders who just quit college to start companies, and some of them are incredibly successful.
Mm-hmm.
And I used to hold back thinking, gosh, what am I encouraging that these students don't go to college and complete? And then I just write checks. If the business is viable and the person has a good product market fit, I'm like, let that person figure out what's right for them.
Yeah, a lot of times
Yeah.
in tech, when there are platform transitions, the younger generations are the ones with innovations, because they have no respect for what came before them,
Right.
because young people don't. And so, of course, you would just do it this way.
Yeah.
If you didn't understand how to do networking in the TCP world back before that existed, you would do it completely differently in the cloud world, right? And
That's right.
and so that is how it works. But I would still advocate for staying in school.
Yeah, so tell me more. And then what happened after your middleware product development opportunities?
Oh, so I think again, like, there's just serendipity to this, and the market that I got really deeply into was middleware. And if you think about middleware touches everything.
Yeah.
It's fundamentally built around message queuing, and then how you integrate into endpoints to then build composable applications, and up the stack from there. So it tends to give you exposure to kind of every part of deep tech. And I think I got really into infrastructure. I think the story I tell is the first time I swiped my credit card at a gas station, and it occurred to me that actually that transaction was going through technology we had built.
Oh,
you kind of go, that's pretty cool.
Oh, from web methods?
Yeah, back in the day.
Yeah.
Sort of sparks this, that's kind of interesting domain to traffic in. But I actually got hired by Microsoft to go ultimately have responsibility for one of their business groups actually in a sales and a field role.
Very cool.
And then came back. So I'd kind of done small company, big company.
Yeah.
That took me more into the product marketing side, and then I kind of got into marketing after that. But I think fundamentally, companies build things and sell things, and so I think if you put yourself in one of those two roles and in the mindset that that's what companies do, you can navigate to lots of interesting paths.
It's the business, and that's what you're focusing on. And you were VP of marketing at Hortonworks, and then GitHub, and of course at VMware you did product marketing. So
Correct.
that's given you a strong business mindset, I guess, when it comes to just about any technology, any company.
Yeah, but you go back to the middleware bit, sort of like once you have an appreciation for the core aspects of how infrastructure functions, then you can start participating in the markets of them.
Yeah.
If you don't understand how they work, you can't really do the you can't really position them effectively. So I was super fortunate. I actually worked on the team that created the platform as a service market back in the day with a product called Cloud Foundry, which became
Yeah.
quite popular. In fact, it was
Totally.
kind of wild. When we named it, sort of had this moment, and then I came back sort of 18 months later, and there were like 2,500 people in a room at a Cloud Foundry conference. It was kind of one of those
Wow.
moments you go like,
Oh my
this is
goodness.
weird.
Yeah, yeah.
But that's how it happens. You sort of envision these things, and they hit and they go. And I think what we learned was that so much of it is about anticipating market transitions and the seams within them. So if you're engaged in the market, the sales cycles move a bit faster than the development cycles. But if you're listening to the market signals on the sales side, the product opportunities become pretty obvious.
Yeah.
And that played out certainly in the platform as a service market. And then, as you said, I had a couple of marketing roles from there.
And then tell me more about Hashicorp. What stage were they at when you joined them?
So again, this is interesting to people, the kind of their career progression. I think you kind of go back to the core tenet that careers are long, jobs are temporary. And I'd always had this point of view that a lot of your early stage jobs are about skills acquisition, such that when you get more senior, you are actually more capable of being successful in those jobs, because believe it or not, there are frameworks and reusable aspects of business building that we do repeat. So I'd led the marketing function for, I guess, technically 3 companies prior. And then someone just had suggested to me, "Have you considered the CEO job?" And I said no. Like, that's not a very fun job for anybody. Thank you very much. I was never my intention. But then I got into conversation with the Hashicorp folks eventually, and I think
were they at seed or Series A?
they were at zero. They were at zero. So they had, I think, maybe like 20 people sort of in a room, but no revenue, just sort of building some open source projects. And
what made you bite the bullet with them? There's just so many companies at that phase at any point.
Yeah, I've talked about it in the past. I think that the framework we use as operators, I consider myself an operator.
Yeah.
And perhaps it's the same framework investors use too. We think about it as market, model, and team. So, I started at the market and I said, hey, this is very, very early days of cloud. I think, based on what I understand, the steady state is going to be heterogeneity. There will be more than every large company in the world will work with more than one cloud provider, even though Amazon was the predominant model at the time. Is there an opportunity to build a company around providing consistency across that experience for the 5,000 largest companies in the world? Probably. So market kind of checked the box. The model, it was an open source model, but a very specific kind of open source model, and I'm happy to talk more about that. But the open source gets painted with a very broad brush.
Yeah.
But there's actually a lot of nuance in open source models.
I'd love to hear what you think about that. What are the nuances?
But I'll come back to that one second. So sort of the model made sense, and then the team and the 2 founders of the company are very, very unusual people, and in many, many ways, not the least of which was their sort of their really unusual humility around having created things that were very popular, but recognizing that it takes more than products to build a company. And so if they needed to partner with someone else to build it, have their vision see its reality, see its fruition, they were happy to do that. So kind of market model team is how it worked. And I think that's how we evaluate all opportunities in the end.
Right. And what about the nuances of the open source?
Well, there's a lot of, open source is a very emotional topic for a lot of people.
Yeah.
But open source businesses, and that's really what I'm referring to, have really evolved over the last 15 years to be actually executed very differently over that time horizon. So if you think about 15 years ago, this is kind of pre-GitHub, where GitHub plays an important role in the open source community today. Back 2009, 2007 to 2012, call it, before GitHub was really established, the only way to create an open source project and to aggregate developers to work on it with you was to contribute your IP to a foundation, like the Apache Software Foundation.
That's right.
And within that, they had a governance model around who can contribute, who can commit, what's the review process for the mailing list, et cetera, for how features get decided and accepted. And you do all your development within that governance framework of the open source foundation. And it worked really, really well for early companies, like actually SpringSource, the first company that I kind of got involved in. The Java Spring framework is all built that way. Tomcat built that way. and obviously the companies that we did had a big hand in that. But then around 2014, when GitHub really got entrenched, you could now actually aggregate all the world's developers on GitHub. And so you didn't necessarily need to contribute your IP to a foundation in order to get the benefit of collaboration and sort of this social coding paradigm. And so that led to the creation of a slightly different model of open source, which, unlike the Spring Sources of the world, which had built commercially venture-backed companies around the older model, now you have a model where actually, a MongoDB or take that or Elastic can put an open source license on a project and say, hey, I'm going to drive the future of this project, and I'm going to invite people to collaborate with me. But ultimately, I'm driving the direction of it, and everything's done out in the open. And if you want to fork it, you're welcome to. But we're taking this in this direction, and we think there's value in doing that. So that's kind of how the model evolved. And so you got companies like Mongo and Elastic and Hashicorp in the same vein, where actually those companies employ all the committers to the projects, but they invite participation from others and saying, if you want to contribute a pull request, I'll look at it. That's basically how it works. And they may make some of aspects of the project. They make architect it such that plugins, for example, can be developed by other people, but fundamentally the core tech is done by a small group of people.
I guess the question is, after being at Cloudera, my concern when I look at open source is always on monetization. If everything is open source, you can just use it for free forever.
Well, and I think that's where the nuance comes in, because Cloudera and Hortonworks were examples of the first generation of open source where everything is contributed to a foundation. So Apache Hadoop is part of the Apache Software Foundation.
Right.
And as a result, IBM has access to the same Apache Hadoop as Cloudera, as Hortonworks. So it's the same product. And so the constraint to building large companies was exactly what happened to Cloudera and Hortonworks in the end, to a large degree, which was once they got big enough, IBM and Microsoft and others would just offer their own service versions of Hadoop, and that put a ceiling on what those companies could get to commercially. Versus the Mongo model, where they're driving it singularly and they have not contributed.
They had their own committers, and they own the roadmap.
And it is not part of a foundation, so no one else can actually fix a bug if the bug exists in Mongo. Puts them in a slightly different position to be able to drive a project forward and build a commercial entity around it. So that was sort of an evolution of the model.
So that's the HashiCorp was more the latter.
Yeah, HashiCorp was 100% the latter. And again, despite what you may read on the internet, all the development of the HashiCorp products is done by HashiCorp employees.
Right.
And so it is open source for sure, in that anybody can fork it, but it's not open source in terms of it's being developed by a community of people.
By the community of people. It's only by the private set of employees.
Correct. And the way that actually manifests is, think about who has the login credentials for the Git repo to do a commit to the main branch. So you
basically hold the controls to it.
Yeah, and that's just the way it works. And I think
interesting. I didn't even think of this.
And then what you've seen more recently, so that was sort of model one was the Hortonworks model, Cloudera model. Model two was sort of the MongoDB model, Elastic model. Model three that's now developed is people putting slightly is sort of taking model two and then putting slightly restrictive licenses on their projects so that people can't use those as embedded components to compete against them. And that's kind of become the default way people are building.
Why would they open source at all in that case? Just for the proliferation and lead gen?
No, open source is both a development model and it's a distribution model. And I think most of the benefit comes from the distribution, in that people can just download it and it's frictionless to use it.
There's not a lot of innovation happening from the community if you go so far out that you cannot even embed it in another product.
Correct. Yeah, and I think companies are doing that to protect themselves from sort of the notion people build just light wrappers around the open source stuff that, say, Mongo is building, and then monetize or sell it for 10 cents on the dollar relative to what Mongo is doing. And so it's logical. Markets are dynamic things that continue to evolve. So the model has evolved.
So you've done something that most of the people on the planet haven't, which is taken a company IPO. What was it like? And successfully.
Yeah, no. We also took Hortonworks public, and
were you part of the executive leadership?
Yeah, I was.
Oh, you were. Okay.
And actually, interesting, Pivotal went public as well, which is the instantiation of the platform as a service company that we created. And so we think of it as it's just a financing event, and I think everybody should think of it that way. It's an important milestone for a company to go public, in that it represents the promise of liquidity for employees. But I think Databricks has proven you don't need to go public to do that because they just keep raising private rounds. So yeah, the joke is going public is easy, being public is hard. And I think that's true. I think the any company that gets to that stage of being ready to go public does it eyes wide open, recognizing that they have the operational cadence and systems that they're effectively running as a public company for quite a long time before they go
public, right?
So the day you flip the switch, it's sort of like, well, we said we'd do it on this date, so let's flip the switch.
You've been ready already.
You've been ready for a long time. But obviously, being public introduces new protagonists into the equation.
Right. And your board of directors and everything has to change.
I think it's more. There's a bunch of, again, innovation happening on this part of the market too. I think it's more that being public introduces a third protagonist in the form of the shareholder into your consideration set. So previously it was really just your employees and your customers, and now you've got
your investors,
your public shareholders. And you always had investors, but it's a relatively illiquid partnership, and they're relatively well informed. Now you've got the public market investor that you have a responsibility to. There's a deep fiduciary responsibility to them, and so that drives sort of a kind of a shortening of the time horizons for you, because now those 90-day increments become much more important. And if you miss your 90-day increments, your share price gets punished, and then your share price goes down, and morale goes down, and you've lost money for investors, and so all that leads down the path of having just to think about this new protagonist in your consideration set, and arguably that's good because it forces a much tighter operational ship for the company.
So I think you've ridden the big data wave, the cloud wave, and here's AI. So what's your take on it? What's the big next thing?
So yeah, someone jokingly referred to me as like the Forrest Gump of software, because I happen to have been around as like sort of a civil servant in the industry when a lot of things are happening, all the way back.
I think it's a good analogy.
Back from like the EJB, WebLogic, Day of the World to platform as a service, and then data from databases to big data, and then the cloud, and then cloud infrastructure, and then to cloud. The data lake concept also came from us to a degree. I think all those things have something in common, and they are very common to the technology landscape, is that they are predicated on a platform transition. So there's some sort of architectural platform transition going on that causes the existing vendor ecosystem to get reset. Because when we're all running databases on mainframes, the only way to get my database was from IBM on a mainframe. When I go to the client server world, architecturally, those things are now separated. Now I can buy a separate database from the operating system. And so now I have the opportunity to build a database business that's standalone from before. So it's this notion of platform transitions, which is what gives rise to the opportunity to build companies. And I think that's the repeatable bit. So ergo, you saw that across all those prior generations, and now you recognize them. When you look back, you go, okay, well, now I see what happened. We went from the cloud one, for example. We went from running a data warehouse on-prem, where I do scale out or up to a degree when my data sets get large, or I put it on a bigger box and scale up. And then cloud architecturally allowed you to separate storage and compute such that you can scale them infinitely, and actually at the same time drive costs of both way down. So that's incredibly disruptive to the Teradata's of the world, who say, no, it costs you X to store the data because it's built on a big box. Now Snowflake comes along and says, well, actually, storage and compute
pay for what you use.
Pay for what you use. And oh, by the way, 3 years from now, our overall costs are going to be lower than they are today because we're just riding Amazon's costs going down. So incredibly disruptive. So, but it's a platform transition, like from private data center to cloud. In the AI world, I think when we think about it, it's actually just a shift in programming paradigm is the way that I think some of us that have been sort of trying to use the analogies of past to explain what's happening. And you're going from this deterministic model of programming where, I have an app, I have a database, I do a request reply, I get, the exact answer that was in that database every time I look it up. And to do that, I have to have preloaded the database with the information, with the tables that I'm going to query, and that is how it works. So take the example of a medical image, right? I'll put the medical image in a database, and I'll tag the different elements in the image, and then my app will do a query and say, return me the tags for this particular image, and off I go. And I can do diagnosis that way.
Right.
Okay, well, that's a deterministic programming paradigm.
Right.
In the AI world, it shifts to a probabilistic paradigm where actually I'll just put an LLM in front of that image and I will say, tell me what you see. And I'm not asking it specifically anything. I'm not asking it to populate a table. I'm just saying, genuinely, tell me what you see and return the information. So it's very, very disruptive in that way. Now I can build a medical imaging app that is far, far more effective than the previous way of building a medical imaging app, because as the model gets smarter and smarter and smarter, my answer gets better and better and better, such that I don't have to pre-populate the fields that I want information on. It'll literally just tell me, look at every historical medical image over the course of time and tell me whether this one is one I should worry about. And that's actually a very different way of approaching the programming paradigm. So I think that deterministic to probabilistic transition is giving rise to a whole set of horizontal tech, like hardware and runtime systems and this complex security and everything else, as well as an infinite number of vertical applications which are going to get recreated that way. So I think about it in terms of the platform transition, and I think that's kind of the only way I can think of to describe it.
Interesting. I didn't quite have that perspective on it. I've been kind of skeptic about investing in anything that's a horizontal, because I think the public cloud vendors and the foundational models have a strong hold on that. What's your take on that?
They do.
Do you think there's an opportunity for innovation outside that?
There is. I think there is an unfortunate reality that
that's kind of what Hashicorp has done with cloud infrastructure, despite having AWS and
GCP. It is, exactly. And I think, unfortunately, the world has gotten relatively clustered around 3 or 4 or 5 infrastructure vendors of the world.
Yeah.
And now the scale of investment required to compete is so large that it's very difficult for someone to compete with Microsoft or Amazon or Google. And if you couple that with the distribution advantage that those companies have, that they have ELAs with every company in the world, it makes it very difficult for new infrastructure entrants to be built. And in fact, if you go back over the last 20 years, you try and say which true infrastructure vendors have arisen over the last 20 years, the only ones you can think of are really VMware and Hashicorp, right? There really haven't been any, because that dynamic is played out. But I think in every market there's an opportunity for the independent, because ultimately the biggest spenders in IT are the global 2000, right? They're called the global 4000, biggest companies in the world. They're in charge, not Amazon or Microsoft or Google, and their reality is hybrid. It always will be. And Microsoft would love it if they only ran on Azure, but they're never going to. And so they actually do have the problem of multi. So that same thing, I would argue, will play out in the AI world. There will be a need for a consistent, experience at every layer of the AI stack that is not tied to a particular cloud vendor.
Foundational model or a cloud vendor.
Yeah, maybe the foundational models are slightly different. I think I almost feel like they are emerging as peers to the cloud vendors because of the scale required. But every other layer of software, I do think there's opportunity.
And then what about verticalization?
Well, I think there's an opportunity in every vertical. I think that's the crazy thing.
I think since the middleware days of web methods, we've had these vertical, business process automation solutions, and several of them have become industries, like Viva has built life sciences, and so many of these.
For sure. And then now you go back to thinking about that platform transition through the lens of the shift to a probabilistic programming model. You start to see that's basically a new approach to middleware.
Yeah.
So,
well, I think if you work in middleware like you and I have, everything is middleware forever, always, right?
Well, it's a new way of building.
We're tainted.
It's a new way of building composite applications.
Yeah.
And to your point, there are dozens of vertical standards around vertical applications, whether it's Viva or whatever it is, that have been built using the deterministic model.
And so now you're saying
there's an opportunity to
Yeah.
rebuild them all on the probabilistic model. And I think that's probably what will play out over the next 10 years.
Interesting. Well, I think you've just gave me a framework on how to view the world. So I love it.
Frameworks and systems, we get kind of obsessed with.
So what do you do for fun outside work?
I have many pursuits.
You have an amazing dog.
We do have an amazing dog. Yeah, I think that whenever we do these things, we get relatively singular minded about these pursuits when we're in them. but you can't do that all the time. So you have to
So you have multiple fun
inject
pursuits.
balances and inject balance in between them all.
Well, I don't know if you want to like share something with the audience and how to balance your life with joy and what joy can look like. Is it skiing or reading a book, friendships?
I think the framework someone once shared with me is you have to sort of identify those things that give you energy and those things that detract.
Yeah.
And that's can be a pretty broad definition. So it turns out in your workday, there are probably many things that give you energy, and there are many things that detract. And you can feel and you know what they are. And so the challenge then becomes, how do you architect your professional life to spend more of your time doing the things that give you energy? And as you get more senior, you have more ability to do that, to actually structure your job in a way that you can actually shift some of the things that do detract energy from you, so you don't have to spend as much time doing them. So I think that's the framework I'd use, is trying to identify those things. And some of those things are professional. Turns out, things like market mapping and, engaging with users and customers and engaging with employees, tends to give people like us energy. And,
is that what gives you energy?
For sure. Yeah, for sure it does. And then, but there are things outside of that professional environment that give you energy as well.
Like
you just have to
reports and
like reading reports. Yeah,
which you don't have to do as much anymore thanks to LLMs.
Now you can just have them summarized.
Yes.
But I mean, that's the model.
So what's one book or a mentor or a person you were inspired by that you want to share?
A book or an inventor? I mean, I think we tend to look for patterns.
You're all about structure and patterns and frameworks.
I definitely have a bias for that. In terms of, I think there are many people in this industry. I almost feel like I've been here for 25 years, and it was my wife's, my girlfriend, not my wife's, that brought me here. It wasn't my choice. I just happened to stay. But now I've been here for quite a long time. I think you realize how interconnected it all is and how small it really is.
Yeah.
And there are many people in that ecosystem that, while it may appear to be really large on the outside, is actually quite small on the inside. And so it has this unique element of sort of overlapping social and professional networks, I think, which makes this area interesting. But then it also has this notion of what we jokingly refer to as intellectual philanthropy, which is the willingness to share, because it's all in the execution. So you'll find lots of people in that overlapping ecosystem who are very, very open to sharing kind of their experiences and their operational approaches to things. And I think we've all benefited from this. What makes this area so unique.
It's a very special place for sure, Silicon Valley. Well, thank you so much for your time. I just learned so much just talking to you. I think the audience would have found a lot of value from that as well.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.